Okay, in tonight's video we're going to talk about estimating square roots. So what happens, for example, if we have a number like 24 that is not a perfect square? We could not make a square if we had 24 Cheez-Its. So the square root of 24 is not a perfect square. So what do? We go ahead and we estimate. So let's get started. Okay, so if you remember, a perfect square is any number that has two identical factors. Two identical factors. And I think I said this in the other notes, think twins. So for example, 9 can equal 1 times 9, but 1 and 9 are not the same. So 9 is also equal to 3 times 3, and these two are identical factors. They're the same number. So here's our list of perfect squares, and this one goes up to the first 10 perfect squares. So we know that the square root of 1 is 1. 4 is a perfect square because the square root of 4 is 2. 9 is a perfect square because 3 times 3 equals 9. 16 is a perfect square, and the square root of 16 is 4. So is 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, and 100. So because 5 times 5 is 25, the square root of 25 is 5. Because 6 times 6 is 36, the square root of 36 is 6. 7 times 7 is 49, 8 times 8 is 64, 9 times 9 is 81, and 10 times 10 is 100. So there is our list of the first 10 perfect squares. So we are going to use that list of perfect squares to estimate the numbers that are not on our list. So numbers that are between 1 and 4, like 2 and 3, numbers between 9 and 16, and 4 and 9. All the numbers that fall in between these numbers are not perfect squares. We could not make squares with those. So we're going to take a look at the number 65. Between which two perfect squares would you find the number 65? So if we look at our list, 65 does not come between 49 and 64. 65 is somewhere after 64. So the square root of 65 is somewhere in here. So it's between the numbers 64 and 81. And we know the square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. So that means that the square root of 65 is somewhere between 8 and 9. And that has to be a decimal. So it's bigger than 8, but it's smaller than 9. Let's take a look at the next example, which is the square root of 12. Right here. So which two integers does the square root of 12 come between? So again, we'll look at our list. 12 comes between 9 and 16. So 12 is somewhere in there. So it's between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 16 is 4. So the square root of 12 is between 3 and 4. Go ahead and try 75 by yourself. Pause the video and see if you can do it, and then restart the video and check your answer. Okay, square root of 75. We know 75 comes between 64 and 81. So 75 is also between those two numbers. It's between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. The square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. So the square root of 75 is between 8 and 9. So what happens if there's a negative number out in front of the square root symbol, we're going to do the same thing. It just means that our final integers are going to be negative. So we're going to take a look at the square root of 29, the negative square root of 29. So back up to here. Which two integers does 29 fall between? Doesn't come between 9 and 16, comes between 25 and 36. So 29 is somewhere in there. It's between 25 and 36. So the square root of 29 is between the negative square root of 25 and the negative square root of 36. The square root of 25 is 5. We'll just make our answer negative. And the square root of 36 is 6. And just make it negative. So if you see a negative outside, just bring the negative through the rest of the problem. You don't have to worry about it. We'll do it just like we did the other two examples. So the same thing for the square root of negative square root of 57. We'll just bring the negatives over here, and the negatives will be in our final answer. So if we go back up to our list, 57 comes between which two integers? It comes between 49 and 64. So that means that the negative square root of 57 is between negative 49 and negative 64. So it is between the integers, the square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 64 is 8. So we have to know that list of the first 10 perfect squares and use those to estimate our numbers that are not perfect squares. So here's a section where you try, and we'll do the first of these numbers. We'll do the square root of 8 together and the square root of 90 together. If you look at all these numbers, none of them are perfect squares. We could not make a square with 8 Cheez-Its. So we have to estimate what the square root of 8 is. So if we go back to our list of the first 10 perfect squares, actually I'm going to write it down on the side over here. We have 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, and 100. So if we're looking at the square root of 8, we know the square root of 8 comes somewhere between the square root of 4, or 8 comes between 4 and 9. So the square root of 8, and yes, you need to do your questions like this, comes between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. The square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 9 is 3. So we're looking for a number that's between 2 and 3. And that number, we have 4.5, 5.5, 10, 11, 9.5, 8, 6.5, and 2.8. So it's asking you to match the number with the approximate square root, draw a line that matches. So the square root of 8 comes between 2 and 3, and the only number that comes between 2 and 3 is 2.8. Let's go ahead and try the next one. We have the square root of 90. We know 90 comes between 81 and 100. So 90 comes between the square root of 81 and the square root of 100. The square root of 81 is 9. The square root of 100 is 10. So we're looking for a number between 9 and 10. And that would be this number right here, which is 9.5. That's between 9 and 10. Okay, let's try one more. So the square root of 31. We know 31 comes somewhere between 25 and 36. So the square root of 31 is between the square root of 25 and the square root of 36. We know that the square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 36 is 6. So we're looking for a number that's between 5 and 6. And that number would be right here, which is 5.5. And again, these are estimations for the square roots. So for the rest of your homework, approximate the square root of 43, square root of 99, square root of 21, square root of 122, and the square root of 63. And please make sure there's one question on the bottom down here. The question is asking how many different triangles did you create with the intersecting lines? We'll use that as the bonus points. So if you have any questions, please ask them in class tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.